Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bell to Bell. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, and we have a phenomenal show for you guys today. First, we're going to look at what WWE is kind of leaning on here as WrestleMania season comes to an end, and they look to chart a new path towards WrestleMania 42, and really, they're leaning on something that I would consider their biggest strength. And then we have to talk about him because he is the talk of the town, he is the talk of the industry, and he is Seth freaking Rollins. He is killing it in his new role. We'll talk about what that looked like in week number 2. And then we have a new champion as well as some new faces as we kick off the post-Mania season. But before we get started, make sure, if you haven't already, to like, share, and subscribe on YouTube at Nick Belsky, or you can find us at Bell to Bell anywhere you get your podcasts from. So not just Spotify anymore. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can find us anywhere, simply put, that you get your podcast from. But let's kick things off with really the WWE saying and making a statement that they are going to put a lot of faith in their biggest strength. And in my opinion, talked about this a couple weeks ago, the WWE's biggest strength right now is the NXT Women's division. Now, they didn't get a big call up and they're on the main roster and they're no longer on NXT, and this is the new face of Monday Night Raw. We didn't get that in the Monday Night Raw post-Mania, but what we did get, and what we have gotten now for 2 consecutive weeks, is a preview of what's to come for the women's division. There's a trio of NXT stars that have been featured not just a little bit, but featured heavily on Monday Night Raw post-WrestleMania 41. First and foremost, it's Stephanie Vaquer. It is somebody who, whenever her music hit, and Io Sky was standing in the middle of the ring on the Monday Night Raw in Las Vegas on the Monday following WrestleMania weekend, we all thought, okay, this isn't a call-up because she is La Primera. She is the NXT Women's Champion. She just defended that title at Stand and Deliver 2 days ago. It's not that time yet. She's not getting a call-up, and we were right. She's not immediately being called up. But WWE is doing it a little bit differently this year because it doesn't seem, outside of Fraxium on Friday Night Smackdown, that there's anybody that is getting called up to stay up at the WWE's main roster. It feels like more of kind of a preview of what we might see later in the year if any of these superstars come up on a more consistent basis. But Stephanie Vaquer comes out. She answers Io Sky's challenge last week. It ends in a disqualification because of the arrival of Giulia and Roxanne Perez as a duo, but we do get to see Stephanie Vaquer in ring with the women's world champion, Io Sky. Not only that, we then get to see her for a second consecutive week going one-on-one with Ivy Nile this past Monday. Now, in that matchup, nobody came out. Vaquer goes out. She wins. It's a showcase match. She beats Ivy Nile. And all of a sudden, we're left to wonder what is going to happen here, because they're still on Tuesday nights NXT. Vaquer versus Roxanne Perez was last week. It was another really solid match, and it feels like they're not moving directly onto the main roster. So it's just kind of like a timeshare. NXT still gets their top stars because Vaquer and Giulia and Roxanne Perez are top stars on that brand no matter what division you look at. And Monday Night Raw crowds and Monday Night Raw audiences are getting a little taste of what's to come, which is very talented crop of women that are going to take over the main roster whenever they do eventually arrive. So we get to see Vaquer in 2 different matches. Giulia and Roxanne Perez, they interview with the previous match we talked about on the Monday Raw after WrestleMania. And then we get Roxanne Perez one-on-one with Rhea Ripley this past week. Now, Rhea did go out there and it looked like she was about to get the victory. It looked like she was about to hit the riptide and she was going to pin Roxanne Perez 1, 2, 3, but Giulia comes in and interferes. So not only do they interfere with Stephanie Vaquer versus Io Sky, but they interfere with Rhea Ripley versus Roxanne Perez. And obviously this is going to lead to a big 6-person matchup at some point where it's Rhea Ripley, Stephanie Vaquer, and Io Sky against Giulia, Roxanne Perez, and person to be named later. I doubt it's going to be Ivy Nile. And that will be entertaining. But all this is WWE telling everybody, hey, not only are we aware of the talent we have in NXT, but we want you to be aware that the NXT women's division, because of its depth, we can talk about Sol Ruka. We can talk about, I'm trying to think, Zarya is another name down there. They have so much depth, and they have the stars that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. It is the hottest division in professional wrestling. If not, I mean, it's obviously that's subjective. I think it is, but I don't think anybody can argue they're automatically in the top 3, maybe even automatically in the top 2, and then you can argue who's number 1. But the NXT women's division has been red hot, and Monday Night Raw is just getting a little bit of a taste of that. Now, the one thing I do want to mention before we talk a little bit about Seth Rollins, because he captivated once again, is Roxanne Perez. And this feels like it's a kind of a getting back on track for Roxanne, because 2025 started with her with a rocket ship strapped to her back. She was the Iron Woman in the Royal Rumble. Not only that, she set the record for being an Iron Woman in the Royal Rumble. 1 hour, I believe it was 7 minutes, or 1 hour close to 8 minutes in the Rumble, was in the Final Four. So that was a huge showing. That told you that the WWE has tremendous belief in Roxanne Perez. And not only that, she was then in the Elimination Chamber. Now, she got into it by beating Raquel Rodriguez with the help of Naomi and Bianca Belair while that was all going on. But she got into the Elimination Chamber, and she had a really solid performance in the chamber match. It took multiple finishers to put her away. So she goes out in the Elimination Chamber. She was in the middle of a solid feud with Bayley all the meanwhile during this. And then that stretch between the chamber match and Stand and Deliver, it felt like she took a step back. And a lot of people, myself included, were very curious as to why. Because it felt like she was getting the rocket ship treatment, the treatment that we saw Tiffany Stratton getting back in 2024. And then all of a sudden, it died down, and she ended up in a 4-way tag match at Stand and Deliver with Cora Jade as her tag team partner, somebody who they had already kind of shown to have a little bit of dissension with earlier in the year. So I'm curious as to what they were doing in that instance, but it feels like it's a get back type of month, and hopefully multiple months, leading to Roxanne Perez being the first of these 3 to likely make the jump full-time to the Monday Night Raw roster. So she's somebody who I think a lot of people are excited to see what's next for. This intermingling of the NXT women's stars on Monday Night Raw, I think at the very least leads to that 6-woman tag match that I mentioned. But I like the fact that they're doing it in a way that they don't just typically do it. Because usually if it's a bunch of NXT stars getting showcased on, whether it be Monday Night Raw, whether it be Friday Night SmackDown, most of the time they come up as a group. They come up together to say, hey, brand supremacy, NXT is here. That's not what we're doing here. Because at NXT, Vaquer, Giulia, and Roxanne don't get along. The last 2 are teaming up on the first one, La Primera. So why would they come up and all of a sudden be aligned simply under the NXT banner? It makes no sense. So I like the fact that they are showcasing these 3, with one being true to what she is, which is the champion and a baby face, and the other 2 being true to what they are, which are heels. Roxanne Perez, one of the better heels in NXT, and Giulia just recently turning on Stephanie Vaquer just before Stand and Deliver. So I like what I'm seeing out of this. And honestly, the more we get to see Vaquer and Giulia and Roxanne Perez on multiple shows a week, the better for the fan base of WWE. Let's talk a little bit about Seth Rollins, because he has had himself really a couple of solid months. The beginning of 2025 was a little weird for Seth Rollins. We've talked about it ad nauseum. It was him preventing, or attempting to prevent, CM Punk from realizing his dreams. And that doesn't really make sense as a character's motivation. I mean, it fits, but at the same time, it's not the greatest for one of your top build stars to be just simply trying to stop the progress of another one and not having ambitions any higher than that. But since the contract signing before WrestleMania, this version of Seth Rollins has been extremely entertaining, and it has kicked into a high gear since WrestleMania. This past week, for instance, you saw two phenomenal promos that bookended Monday Night Raw. He was the first person out, and then he was the last person out that led to the main event match eventually between Sami Zayn and Bron Breakker. Two thoughts on those promos from both Seth and Sami. One, their chemistry is some of the best and some of the most underrated in WWE and in professional wrestling. And secondly, Sami Zayn is great all the time. And I think we take him for granted because I even said leading into WrestleMania, Sami doesn't need to be on the card. He doesn't. It would be best if during this match at Elimination Chamber, he's taken out by Kevin Owens and he misses WrestleMania. I think that's what's best for the company simply because it helps build Kevin Owens. Now, things didn't go according to plan because Kevin Owens got injured. And all of a sudden, I'm not going to say all was for naught because they were phenomenal matches. And when he comes back, he can come back as a big bad heel. If he comes back, of course, we're all hoping for the best for Kevin Owens. But at the same time, in that time missed, you get Sami Zayn back and you're just like, wow. Not only is he great on the mic, he was great in the ring with Bron Breakker. It was one of the better main events of Monday Night Raw since they've head over to Netflix. Unfortunately, he was taken out. That's how it ended. Seth Rollins gives him the opportunity and says, hey, you can either join us or you can be against us, but I'll open door number 3 for you. You can leave. You can avoid us altogether. Sami decides not to take it, even though Paul Heyman gives him the opportunity to say, if you accept, you will immediately be the number 1 contender for the WWE Championship on Friday Night SmackDown after Randy Orton, John Cena on May 10th. You will be next in line for whoever wins that title at Backlash. Which leads me to my next kind of comment on this here. Since when does Paul Heyman and Seth Rollins have the authority to make that happen? Right? We were all talking before WrestleMania about the favor that Paul Heyman owed to CM Punk. And we thought maybe that favor ends up being CM Punk gets put into the world title match between John Cena and Cody Rhodes. And the biggest pushback of that is, why on earth would Paul Heyman have that type of sway? Why would he have that type of power? And we all said, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. And instead, the favor was simply be in my corner. Abandon Roman Reigns and just be in my corner. Something that, yeah, makes 1000% sense that is in the control of one Paul Heyman. So why all of a sudden now is that the bat that he's swinging? That, hey, I have the sway. I have the pull that if you agree to go to SmackDown, you immediately are next in line after Randy Orton to go after John Cena in his retirement run. Maybe because it doesn't end with Paul Heyman. Maybe because this group doesn't end with Seth Rollins at the top. Maybe it's because this group is already made up of more than 3 people. That has been speculation since last week when Bron Breakker came out and speared the daylights out of both CM Punk and Roman Reigns. Is who is the number 4? Who is the 4th member? Everybody's speculating, and I've seen a lot of great speculation online. I've seen a lot of great options. There is a lot of great options. None better, in my opinion. If we were simply going to go Rollins, Breakker, Heyman, and then one other wrestler, man, Austin Theory is the best I've heard. I would love to see Austin Theory be put in that spot. But again, what if we've already seen it? What if we've already seen the rest of this new faction, but we just haven't made the connective tissue yet? Are all 3 of these, Rollins, Breakker, Paul Heyman, are all 3 of these under the final boss? Now, I understand that's a touchy subject because the final boss has not endeared himself to the wrestling fan base, at least the internet wrestling community, very well over the last couple of weeks. He didn't show up to WrestleMania. His interview on the Pat McAfee show certainly ruffled some feathers. But if you're WWE creative, there is some connective tissue, like I mentioned. Rollins does the throat slit to Bron Breakker so he can absolutely demolish Sami Zayn, and what we're only imagining is going to put him on the shelf, or at the very least make him physically or medically unable to compete for a week or two. But the throat slit is fairly identical to the one that The Rock gave to John Cena a couple weeks back, or a couple months back at this point, at Elimination Chamber. Is that a coincidence? Quite possibly. It's not like that is a very unique piece of sign language that is used in this industry. But the proximity between the two, it has a little bit of connective tissue to me. Then, of course, there's the history between Rollins, Heyman, and The Rock from WrestleMania 40. That wasn't that long ago. Just over 1 calendar year ago. Rollins was going after The Rock. The Rock was annoyed by Seth Rollins, and Paul Heyman was standing behind the final boss and Roman Reigns as they went into WrestleMania 40. With Heyman by Rollins' side, maybe, just maybe, and we saw, I don't remember if it was on WWE television or if it was an interview off of television, Seth Rollins say, yeah, I'm cool with The Rock right now. He invited me to the Moana 2 premiere, so we're all right. Maybe, just maybe, that connective tissue means that the new evolution, as everybody is trying to deem it, is already formed. But instead of Seth Rollins being the veteran, the figurehead, maybe it's The Rock. Maybe The Rock is Ric Flair. Maybe John Cena, who is still under The Rock to some extent, there's still some storyline there, is Triple H in this instance. Seth Rollins is Batista, but a little bit older in his career, later in his career. And maybe Braun Breaker is the Randy Orton. That's what everybody's been asking, is who's the Randy Orton of this entire faction? Maybe it's already Braun Breaker. So maybe we're seeing Rock, Cena, Rollins, and Breaker as a faction, with Cena holding down the fort on Friday Night SmackDown for the final boss, and Rollins and Breaker alongside Paul Heyman holding down the fort on Monday Night Raw. So the final boss has his hands on every single corner of the WWE. And of course, obviously, NXT, Ava being his daughter, that's a pretty easy connection there. I don't know. That's just speculation. That's just, in my head, a small little theory that I thought of whenever I was watching Monday Night Raw this week. Let me know in the comment section. Do you think that could be possible, or is that just a little too far-fetched? Or are you just not interested in anything with The Rock right now because of the last couple of weeks and what he has done online? We'll have to wait and see, but I will say one thing's for certain. Seth Rollins continues to be extremely captivating in this new role as a messiah, as the bringer of the future, if you will. And I can't wait to see what's next up going into next week's Monday Night Raw, and maybe even a spot on Backlash. Let's talk about a title change that happened this past week, and that is the Women's United States title. Zalina Vega is your second ever Women's United States title holder, pinning Chelsea Green on last Friday night SmackDown. That is her third consecutive victory over Chelsea Green, and if I'm not mistaken, it's in as many weeks. She gets the countout victory, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I guess technically she deserves to get a rematch. Chelsea Green wants a rematch. She said she was screwed in that event, and all of a sudden, Super Code Red in the second matchup, and pinfall. Zalina Vega takes out Chelsea Green for a second consecutive week, and then that means she gets a title match on the Friday Night SmackDown after Mania. Same exact thing. The Secret Hervis gets, I love that name. The Secret Hervis gets ejected from ringside, gets banned from ringside, gets tossed by the referee, and then right after that, short order, Zalina Vega hits another Code Red, and she pins Chelsea Green, ending Green's 137-day inaugural Women's United States title reign. Now, I will say this. A lot of people online did not agree with the way that this went down, and I can't say I disagree. Chelsea Green was having a fairly good inaugural run as the Women's United States champion. Everything that she did was working, but she wasn't given very much to work with. She started off with the feud against Michin, and that worked as a initial feud for that title. And then they never really transitioned out of that. They never really gave her another feud. They never gave her another wrestler to battle with. They didn't give her other contenders really after that. And then they do nothing for WrestleMania. Right? I talked about the Super Code Red was a cool spot, but that was the matchup for WrestleMania weekend in Vegas. Was Chelsea Green is going to go one-on-one with Zalina Vega. It didn't feel like it did that title do justice. And to close out the run, she looked weak. She lost 3 consecutive times. One by countout, where she was just not paying attention to the count, making her look like she is a dumb heel. And then they have her lose back-to-back weeks to Zalina Vega. Now, part of this is maybe they're just trying to make Zalina Vega look strong. And honestly, that's exactly what that title is for. It's to give opportunity to people that have otherwise not been given it when it was just the world title and the tag titles. It is to give people opportunity to go out and to shine and to do stuff that they haven't done in some time. And Zalina Vega has not had a strong singles run in some time. So honestly, as far as what's going to happen going forward, I'm just going to say, let's let this play out. I am, because while Chelsea Green was a tremendous choice and she was well-deserved to be the inaugural champion of the Women's United States title, I think that putting it on Zalina Vega is doing exactly what you set out to do when you created these mid-card titles to begin with. It is to showcase, it is to highlight talents that otherwise have not been given the opportunity. Now, I will say this. While I'm going to reserve judgment until we see how this run goes for Zalina, the Intercontinental title is much further ahead. And if I'm not mistaken, the Intercontinental title was awarded after the Women's United States title. I think Lyra has been booked very well. I think that that has elevated her stock to being somebody who is much higher than before was just really a tournament wrestler. Right? She came into the main roster. She had a great showing in the Queen of the Ring tournament. And then she kind of faded to the back. They didn't really have anything for her. And then they created the Intercontinental title. She goes through it again. And once again, you're saying, wow, Lyra, great in tournaments. But Lyra has become much more than that. The title defenses that she's gotten, the fact that they've lined up contenders and she's been able to mow them down. And now the fact that she's getting into a program with a star that could be or should be in most months, most times, could be a main eventer any given night. The fact that Becky Lynch is now going to start a feud with Lyra Valkyria for the Intercontinental title, it makes it feel like it's much more important. It makes it feel much more elevated. It makes it feel that it is much further ahead than the Women's United States title. I'm excited to see how that plays out. I think that it has built Lyra up to be one of the top names on Monday Night Raw. I think it's continuing to build her as a top babyface because she's great in ring. And this is just excelling her forward time after time after time. It also helps that she was Lyra 2 belts at WrestleMania that they went on Sunday, right before the main event. But it does feel a little bit like they have taken much more care of the Intercontinental title on Monday Night Raw than they have of the United States title when Chelsea Green was holding it. And that's the thing, is it's not like the champion wasn't worthy of getting more backing, getting more opportunities, getting more contenders to line up and actually vie for that US title. She was great in everything that she did. She was great on backstage segments. She was great in ring, but they just never gave her the proper opportunity to elevate the title as its inaugural champion. And now we'll have to wait and see if they do it with the second ever champion in Zalina Vega. But congratulations to Vega, because that is somebody who has worked her butt off for the opportunity that she currently has. And now let's see how it plays out. Let's see what she does with it. Maybe, just maybe, we're talking about the Zalina Vega in the similar way that we are talking about Lyra after her holding that title for 4 or 5 months. So congratulations again to Zalina. I'm excited to see what they do next. Now, let's close out this episode, because post-Mania, once you see the dust settle, one of the biggest things that you have to look forward to is what WWE is going to do with a lot of the stars that have either returned or debuted in the months leading up to, or the week following, most likely, that event, there's a handful of names. There's a lot of people that have debuted in WWE. There's a handful of people that have returned to WWE in the following months. And a lot of them, there's so much left to be seen about what is going to happen in their story. So I'm going to run down through the best returns and debuts of WWE in 2025 and what I would like to see happen moving forward. First and foremost, the first person to debut. This was back on the second edition of Monday Night Raw on Netflix. And honestly, this is somebody who has immediately become one of the most marketable stars that WWE has to offer. And that's Penta. Now, it helps that he had a prior following because he was one of the best independent wrestlers and then one of the best on AEW for many, many years. But he was immediately a star in WWE. If the question was, well, are people going to know who he is? Are they going to kind of take what he's doing and latch onto it? And is it going to work? Is it going to fit? Yes. All of those questions, the answer was immediately yes. He had a solid first feud with Pete Dunne and Ludwig Kaiser, in which he was winning matches, in which he was looking strong, in which there was some motivation, but it was really just to showcase his talents, what he's about, and to kind of present him to the WWE universe. And then he gets into the program that he's currently in today, which is him with the Judgment Day, or against the Judgment Day, and in and around the Intercontinental title. It's been good so far. It's been great so far. And honestly, this is the easiest one to look into the future and say, what are they going to do with him? He's going to continue to be around that belt. He's going to continue to be around that title because it is now a title that is going to be vied for by guys like Penta, guys like Dom. There's still something with Finn Balor that has to come around the other corner. But guys like Ludwig are probably going to get back into that. A guy like Sheamus would be great to bring back on into the fold for this. But with Bron Breakker vacating that entire title window, that opens up space for guys like Penta to really be able to shine. So this has been a lot of fun with Penta so far. He's one of the key players in Raw's mid-card, and he has become must-see for WWE. So that one was easy. His brother is also one of the best returns / debuts of 2025. Rey Fenix has been so much fun to watch. He already has a Mania singles match under his belt, stepping in for Rey Mysterio against El Grande Americano, and he showed out at WrestleMania as well. And with that, we still are yet to see his first real feud. So that's what's next for Rey Fenix. Because it was a couple of matches similar to what we saw with Penta, with Pete Dunne and Ludwig Kaiser and Chad Gable early. We've seen Rey Fenix get the opportunity to just come out and show everybody what he's about. He then sort of got intermingled with the El Grande Americano versus LWO feud, which gave him that opportunity at WrestleMania. And now we're left to wonder what's next for him. Well, the United States title picture is very clouded, right? You have LA Knight. You assume Shinsuke Nakamura is somewhere in that picture. You have Jacob Fatu, who's the new champion, and I don't think he's going to lose it anytime soon. And then you have Drew McIntyre. So it's getting very crowded at the top of the United States title picture on Friday Night SmackDown. So where does that leave Rey Fenix? That's the biggest question mark for me. I think that he could get in there with guys like Drew. He could get in there with guys like LA Knight. He could get in there with a Solo Sikoa, and he could immediately kind of rise to that level. But it feels they're going to pinpoint something else or someone else for him to feud with. My only hope for him, and it goes for him and for Aleister Black, is that they don't end up wasting them the way that they've kind of wasted the return of Andrade. He had a lot of heat when he returned. A lot of people were excited that he was back. He had a great program with Carmelo Hayes, and then one title match came of it, and since then, nothing. Since then, absolutely nothing. So the hope is that Rey Fenix and Aleister Black, who we'll talk about next, are able to kind of break through that mold on Friday Night SmackDown and not just be ancillary talent the way that Andrade has been really for the last 5 or 6 months since that Carmelo Hayes feud. With that said, let's talk about Aleister Black a little bit. I was so excited last week when he came back, first and foremost, because I've always really enjoyed watching him. But I was so excited that he got his original WWE music. We have talked a lot about how a lot of the themes today they're not great. They're not great at all. But the fact that you bring back Aleister Black, you give him his original theme music, it's a step in the right direction. So he's going to have a short reintroduction feud against The Miz. I think that is going to be something that is entertaining, right? I'm sure it'll be a great match. The Miz has been putting on some solid matches when given the opportunity over the past year. But again, similar to Rey Fenix, what do they have for him after that? Because you can have we're just going to have him go one-on-one with a couple of other people on the card, on the roster. Everybody's going to get excited about him. What do you give him meaningful after you reintroduce him? That could be said for Rey Fenix. That could be said for Aleister Black. And that could be said for Rusev as well. He highlighted his dominance in his return, throwing around Otis, throwing around Akira Tozawa. Now he's going to go one-on-one with Otis on Monday Night Raw next week. I think Rusev needs to run through the mid-card of Monday Night Raw. He said in his promo package last week, he was the guy that had the tank at WrestleMania. That's how good he was. How good he was as quick as he was too, and how impressive that should be looked at as. I think he needs to come back and he needs to run through the mid-card on Monday Night Raw. Maybe a feud with Penta would be worthwhile between those two. I think that would be great work in ring and also just storytelling wise. I think those two could tell a great story. But once Rusev is done, unfortunately, running through Otis and running through the Alpha Academy, I want to see him just absolutely mow down competitor after competitor after competitor, eventually leading him to setting his sights on the Intercontinental title. And if Dominic Mysterio is still the title holder at that time, boy, a Rusev versus Judgment Day feud, just hook it into my veins, because that would be phenomenal. Now, there's two more people I want to talk about here. One, I'm going to briefly do because he's not on the main roster, but I have really liked that debut, and that's Ricky Saints, North American champion of NXT, in ring, on mic. His music is something that I think is very befitting of the wrestler, and something that, honestly, if you hear it enough, it'll become something that's synonymous with the wrestler, which I think is where the disconnect is with a lot of the Def Rebel stuff. Is there's a disconnect. You hear it and you're like, I don't even know who that is. You need to have that connection, and I think Ricky Saints' music is able to do that. So he's somebody that I'm keeping my eye on in NXT, and he's somebody that they sorely needed down in NXT. Like I said, they have the NXT Women's division, which is carrying that brand right now. They have a handful, I can count on one hand, but I'll say it's a handful of top marketable men's superstars down there. Guys like Trick Williams, guys like Obafemi. But they really needed to bolster that men's singles division. And I think Ricky Saints did just that. He comes in, he has a great feud with Ethan Page leading into Stand and Deliver. He is somebody who you look at and you say, all right, this guy can carry the flag of that NXT brand for years if need be. But if not, he's somebody that could definitely translate to main roster audiences very easily. So I've really enjoyed Ricky Saints. And that brings me to my last person. Somebody that I've talked about, somebody who's on the screen, so you know I was going to talk about him. Alexa Bliss returns at the Royal Rumble, not only returning at 21 overall, but returning to the biggest pop of the Royal Rumble event. Any year, that distinction is a huge honor. But this year in particular, in Indianapolis, when you look at all of the stars that were at the Royal Rumble, shoot, we had John Cena, we had CM Punk, we had Cody Rhodes out there, we had Seth Rollins out there, we had Drew McIntyre out there, we had Roman Reigns, if I didn't already say him. There were a lot of stars. Charlotte Flair returned at the Royal Rumble. All of their pops paled in comparison. All of their crowd reactions paled in comparison to Alexa Bliss returning. It was huge. And she had a lot of backing when she returned to WWE. Then she gets in the Elimination Chamber, has a fairly strong showing there. And since then, crickets. Nothing. Was not featured at all in the build-up to WrestleMania following Elimination Chamber. Has not been on television since WrestleMania 41. And now there are rumors that she'll return as the leader, not just a member, but the leader of the Wyatt Six. another faction who, similar to Alexa Bliss, has not been featured on television in quite some time. Initially, I thought, I don't think the Wyatts need Alexa Bliss. I don't think, moreover, Alexa Bliss needs the Wyatts. But with this reset, I think it's a good thing if you put those two together, if you put Bliss with the Wyatts, because right now, as we're seeing on Monday Night Raw, there is an overabundance of women's competitors that are simply themselves and able to go out there and do the damn thing as Roxanne Perez, as Rhea Ripley, as just Io Sky. And if there's anything that's going to help the Wyatt Six, putting a massive star in Alexa Bliss side by side with Uncle Howdy and that group, maybe it can reinvigorate that. Maybe it can get it back to where it was whenever they debuted in the middle of 2024, because that debut had everybody talking. And then slowly after that, they faded into the background. Now, of course, there are rumors of an injury to Uncle Howdy, to Bo Dallas, which will obviously kill it because he was the biggest name. He was the biggest face in that faction. But when they return, having it be Uncle Howdy and Alexa Bliss leading the rest, I think that would be probably the only way at this point that you could salvage that faction. And that's a faction that WWE needs. I understand that we've moved away from the spooky, supernatural side of professional wrestling, but the kid in me always likes to see it. And especially for those who really appreciated what Bray Wyatt was able to do, and the fact that they are trying to maintain and build his legacy through continued use of the Wyatt name in WWE. And if they can do it the right way, then it's worth doing. And to do it the right way, it feels like Alexa Bliss at this point has to be involved, because if you're not going to do it well, if you're not going to do it the right way, then you definitely, for the same reasons that I said that it would be great to add to his legacy, you don't want to detract from his legacy by simply using the Wyatt name in a program that just isn't working. And it didn't work the first time around. They're going to give it another shot. And if they do, giving it Alexa Bliss, adding that to it will certainly give it a chance, or at least a fighting chance, of working out the second time. But that's going to do it for this episode of Bell to Bell. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. And remember, you can find us on YouTube at Nick Belsky. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Or if you prefer an audio version, you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.